Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 10th of July 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Nintendo prevents the EVO fighting game tournament from broadcasting Smash Bros. Melee, then doesn't. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Next-gen EA games for the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 will cost £54.99 in the UK. Mojang sent a cease and desist order from a mini-golf company. And Dota 2 finally, officially, kinda almost launches. All this and the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. Popular fighting game website Shoryuken.com confirmed that Nintendo had refused the license for the broadcast of GameCube title Smash Bros. Melee for the Evolution tournament this year. Smash Bros. Had made its return to the Evolution circuit after a community competition whereby the title with the most money donated to charity would receive a spot on the Evolution tour. Fans of the game raised about $100,000 for charity, and as a direct result, Smash Bros. Made its return. It was, of course, the GameCube version of the game as opposed to the Wii version Brawl. The GameCube version has, for the most part, been the more popular of the two when it comes to the competitive side of things. However, Nintendo earlier today refused permission to broadcast Smash Bros. Melee at Evolution 2013. After a massive uproar on the internet, which included a top-voted post on Reddit, enough Twitter discussion to have the word Smash Bros. Trending worldwide, as well as posts on various gaming websites, Nintendo reversed their stance and have allowed the Melee stream to proceed. This is not the first time that Nintendo has prevented streams from going live when it comes to their particular titles. Major League Gaming a couple of years ago had a problem when it came to Smash Bros. Brawl in the Orlando event of 2010. They were prevented from broadcasting once again there. There were various rumors as to why that was, including the possibility that there were rights and licensing problems with the character Snake, and as a direct result, Konami had gotten involved and made a big mess of things. However, it would appear at this point that everything has been resolved and the stream will be allowed to continue. The fact that this had to happen in the first place, I think, is very much indicative of just how out of touch Nintendo would appear to be. I mean, let's be entirely frank here. What have they been doing recently that's been pro-consumer? Not a huge amount. Not a huge amount. There's been an awful lot of controversy surrounding this company, not least of which, of course, is the claiming of Let's Play videos involving Nintendo titles, which also affected various journalistic outlets that had legally and rightfully used footage from those games. Whatever the case, it seems to me like Nintendo is in this weird place where they don't really know what they're doing when it comes to the expanded use of their games. We are in a very strange time. There has been a surge in the creation of derivative media based on current interactive media. The idea being that you can create content from a game that allows you to make content within it, and that the very act of playing that game is in itself the creation of content. When it comes to multiplayer titles, this is particularly true, considering that the multiplayer title acts as the framework and the rule set, whereas the content is created by the people playing it. The result of that being that each match ends up being completely different. This is a very weird legal gray area, and I don't really know of any direct comparisons. I think the closest that I could come to that is the act of playing a board game in a tournament, for instance. Do you have to acquire permission in order to broadcast that? Frankly, I just don't know. I have a feeling that this is an area of the law that hasn't been properly explored as of yet, and that actual copyright law has not caught up to it. The closest I could find was information on the subject of Scrabble, the use of Scrabble in a tournament, for instance. Whether or not you can do that without having to ask permission from the copyright holder. The current opinion of that is yes. I'm basing that on a 1996 Ninth Circuit appeal case by the name of Allen and Academic Games League of America Incorporated. And in this particular situation, they held that the playing of a game in public does not constitute a performance. That exclusive right to perform is conferred by the US Copyright Act upon the copyright holder. That, of course, is only US law. God knows what the rest of it is, and that was quite some time ago. It is a very difficult thing indeed. Based on those laws, the performance of a video game competitively at a tournament like that should not, in fact, require the permission of the game company in question, the actual developer or publisher. But that's assuming that that case actually applies. Is it binding precedent? As far as I'm aware, yes it is. But it does apply to board games, not necessarily video games. It could be held that that precedent still applies, or there could be a differentiation. Yeah, it's a damn hard subject, isn't it? So legally very much a gray area, but leaning towards the notion that you shouldn't have to acquire permission. Now, what has happened since the advent of esports is an attempt by the actual companies themselves that own these games, that have created them, to enforce license agreements on tournament organizations. Now, for the most part, this has been done in a fairly amicable fashion. That means that they've put forward a set of rules and the tournaments have agreed to abide by them, and everything's pretty much hunky-dory in that respect. The problem with Nintendo is it's rather ambiguous as to whether or not you can actually get that. They don't have an established framework. Blizzard has one of those, yeah? Blizzard has a setup whereby they say, these are the rules for competitive tournaments. This is what we allow, this is how you get your license. And generally speaking, that's worked pretty well. Having worked within that framework, I've done 6 tournaments under those licenses. Everything has worked out absolutely fine for me, and it seems fair. Do we technically have to go through it? No. We probably wouldn't. That license most likely wouldn't hold up. But it's generally best not to piss off the company. And that's the situation that we're currently in. Not only when it comes to esports broadcasts, but in terms of Let's Play videos and things like that. It's generally best just to be amicable with the company, not to get into legal wrangling, because quite frankly, I don't think either party really wants that to happen. They would just prefer things tick along and the status quo is maintained and nobody has to pay out large amounts of money to another party. From a purely academic standpoint, would you consider the playing of a multiplayer competitive game to be a transformative work? Would you consider that game to be the actual performance itself, or is it merely the rule set that allows that performance to take place? Arguably, I would say it is the latter. That's what I would lean to in that respect. One way or the other, Nintendo are dumbasses. I think, we can debate this to Kingdom Come, and I find it very interesting. But, one, half of you are probably asleep, and secondly, Nintendo are dumbasses. Seriously, stop this nonsense. Nintendo are rapidly becoming the new EA, and quite frankly, if they hadn't built up such an absurd amount of consumer goodwill over the past 10 years, I think that many people would have turned on them by now. They are taking a lot of steps which show they are utterly out of touch with the current scene. And it's not just in the way that they interact with their fans and with their respective communities either, it's reflected in their business model, and that worries me a lot. Game Stores Group in the UK has confirmed that the price for EA next-gen titles on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One at launch will be £54.99. This is on average anywhere between a £10 to £15 sterling increase in price, which would bring the equivalent of a next-gen game in the UK to a rather staggering $81.75. Up to this point, the UK has been fairly equivalent to the US price for video games, and as a result has ended up being only slightly more expensive due to value-added tax. In some instances, particularly PC games, it in fact has ended up being significantly cheaper, as a result of PC games averaging around £30 to £35 new, which would be under the $60 price tag of some AAA releases in the United States. This, needless to say, is a fairly large jump, and I have to wonder if it will stay that way. For one, we know that this is only for EA titles right now. EA is currently pushing the price of several of their franchises, it would seem. We already spoke earlier in the week about the issue over in India. Now it would appear that the UK is getting the shaft when it comes to new releases on the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. But I have to say, one, it has been a little while since we've really had a price hike, especially considering that games haven't really been keeping up with inflation. We've said it time and again, and I know some people don't believe me, but it is most assuredly true. The price of games back in the day, especially on consoles that used cartridges, was significantly higher than what we're currently looking at. Certainly wasn't the case across the board by any stretch of the imagination, but we're talking about games from premium publishers and developers like Square, as well as, of course, Nintendo. There were some very high-priced titles, and games in general have actually got cheaper. But this is a very significant price hike. Yeah? £55 versus the current 40. Yeah? That's how much you can buy The Last of Us for, which is certainly not a game that has any reason to be discounted right now. You can get the special edition of The Last of Us for £54.99, and the standard edition will cost you £40 on PlayStation 3. This also contradicts reports that we got in June, which indicated that first-party titles for the Xbox One would in fact be £40 or lower. They would basically cost the same as the current 360 counterparts. This is a very, very strange reversal indeed. Obviously, Game is, as far as I'm concerned, a legitimate source. They are the biggest retailer in the UK. If that's what they're saying they've been told, then that is without question correct. It's interesting that EA would be the ones pushing this, but it's not, of course, entirely surprising. They are a franchise-driven organization, and they feel they have sufficient brand loyalty to be able to shove this upon people. As far as I'm concerned, though, all you're going to end up doing here is really burning the bridges. You're going to discourage people from adopting the new system. They're far more likely to buy the games on the previous consoles because, honestly, the graphical leap between the current gen stuff and the early next gen stuff is not going to be that large when it comes to releases that are put across all of those platforms. We often see that the difference between them is not that significant, and as a direct result, I have a feeling that a lot of people will just hold on to their old consoles and continue to buy into those franchises instead of jumping onto the next gen. This, of course, may slow adoption rates. This actually sucks. This is not good at all. The last thing we want is the console market to contract because people are afraid to move over to the next generation. Myself as a PC gamer, I'm annoyed by that because I feel that the next-gen systems will actually push forward the PC scene quite nicely. It'll finally give us that leap that we've needed so that we don't get terrible ports and so that we're not held back by 8-year-old hardware. Slow adoption rates would not help that cause, so it's certainly in my best interest to say, yeah, it would be nice if you guys didn't do this. I would be fairly surprised if I saw every company go this way. I really do think that that is going to severely hurt attachment rates. If you jack up the price that significantly, then that just means less games will be bought. That is bad for everybody. That causes the overall scene to contract. You don't want that. It's stupid. We'll see, of course, over the next few weeks whether or not any company decides to follow suit. Mojang has received a cease and desist from Putt-Putts, which, as far as I can tell, is some kind of mini-golfing company. They allege that Mojang has been using their Putt-Putt trademark without permission, and as a result, it has benefited Mojang, and they are demanding that they cease doing so immediately, or they will refer the case to legal counsel. The strange thing about this case, of course, is in fact there is nothing of the sort within the base game of Minecraft. The Putt-Putt maps were created by fans and videos were uploaded to YouTube, which have been provided as evidence that were attached to the cease and desist letter itself. This is kind of hilarious, quite frankly. However, it does bring up a fairly interesting point. Now, of course, as far as I'm concerned, Mojang could not in a million years be held liable for this so-called trademark infringement. Absolutely not. It was not them who created the Putt-Putt craft maps. These mini-games, these mini-golf maps, these are not made by Mojang. They were modded into the game. The question, I suppose, would then become, do you have any responsibility for the mods created by third parties? Do you have to take those mods down, as it were? The answer is probably not. There has been a recent case whereby a cease and desist was sent to a game called Barcraft, which was a mod for StarCraft 2. Blizzard complied with that, and they removed the actual mod in question from the Blizzard arcade. However, it should be pointed out that under the terms of service, they basically own all mods that are created for their game, which means that they are then held responsible. It also used a significant number of Blizzard assets, whereas stuff that is used in Putt-Putt, less so. I mean, you can do way more modding with Minecraft than you ever could with StarCraft 2. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's a more difficult case. There will no doubt be more of this stuff. I mean, we have seen a lot of cease and desists in the past for mods, but generally speaking, they're aimed at the ones that made them, as opposed to the guys that made the game in question. That's what a sane, sensible company that had done its research would do. They would approach the people that made the mod, and then they would do their cease and desist to them. They wouldn't do the C&D to the company that made the game that is not in any way responsible whatsoever for the third-party mods that are created by somebody else. They don't curate them, they can't actually do anything whatsoever to stop them, and quite frankly, this is pretty damn funny. And finally, Dota 2 has released, like 2 years after it first released. Dota 2, of course, has been an extremely lengthy beta, which has been anything but closed, with a million bazillion keys floating around the place, available to pretty much anybody that wanted them. There was, in fact, a bot available that would distribute a key to you and had an inventory of hundreds of thousands of the bloody things, which were regularly given out to Steam users, and were quite frankly annoying as hell. The final update prior to the official launch includes more ways to learn the game, training queues, as well as a variety of different modes, such as a restricted hero pool which can be used to easily learn the game. The game can now be downloaded by everybody directly from the Steam store itself. That ends, of course, the beta period for one of the largest esports titles in the world, and with the International 3 coming up with possibly the largest prize pool in esports history, things are about to get very, very interesting for the Dota 2 community. One way or the other, I would strongly recommend you try it out. It's free to play, just try and ignore the Russians. I'm sorry, das Vidanya and all that, but everyone that I run into is annoying. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Before I go, I would like to give you the OC Remix track of the day. A brief interlude before we revisit, of course, the absolutely wonderful sounds of the Balance and Ruin album. I would like to play for you a track by the name of Bad Octopus, because I see no reason not to. This is by a remixer called Fishy, featuring XPRT Novice, and it is a remix of the tracks Save Them and Grand Finale. To suggest that this would be strange would be an understatement. It is rather fantastic, and it takes a rather light-hearted, comedic and cartoonish tone to this particular track, with some rather interesting crossing of the genres. So do enjoy it, folks. You can download it in the description below this video, and I will see you next time.